Bookseller Crow, almost live.
Hello! 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 Welcome back to the Bookseller Crow! We're so excited and thrilled to have an event starting up, and that you are all here and have come on this hot night is even more exciting. Me in? Sorry.
There you go.
Mustn't be on the edge of the frame. Sorry, mustn't be in front of you either. But, well, I might do. We're really excited to welcome Caleb tonight, all the way up from Gypsy Hill. When we were programming the events, we knew we always wanted Caleb to be the first event of when we opened up because of the book, but also because you're a local lad. And we're just really proud that you chose to come here as well. So thank you very much. I shall read your bio that I've prepared earlier. Caleb Nelson is a 26-year-old British. Are you still 26? Oh, 26-year-old British Ghanaian writer and photographer living in southeast London. And his photography was shortlisted for the Palm Photo Prize and won the People's Choice Prize. His short story Prey was shortlisted for the BBC National Short Story Award in 2020, and Open Water is his first novel. Jonathan Main is the the co-owner of the Bookseller Crow. And before becoming a bookseller, he was a bread maker in Leicester. So anyway, just leave that there. But yes, please welcome Caleb to the Bookseller Crow.
How are you, Caleb?
I'm good. I'm going to need the story about the bread making.
There's no bread making. There's Stilton cheese making and pork pie making. No bread. Although there's bread making now. I'm hoping you're going to read to us before I ask you a few questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Cheers.
First of all, hello everyone. Thank you for coming through. It's like a really nice thing to be sat in the bookshop and actually talking to people and being part of this community.
Speak louder.
Sorry.
If you wouldn't mind projecting.
This is a work in progress. We were actually looking at trying to get microphones.
Yes.
But, we haven't got them yet. So
I'm going to read a section of the book about summer because it is summer now and it's baking, so I think it's appropriate. It's summer now, so you're all moving slower. DJ Screw, legendary Houston pioneer of chopped and screwed music, would make songs at slower tempos to feel the music and so you could hear what the rapper is saying. I make my tapes so that everyone can feel them. For Screw, slowing a record down allowed it to breathe. There is a pleasurable freedom in this slowness, where the frequency's lower and it's not so much a matter of the head, but the chest. You say words with your chest. You feel bass, slap, thud, like a heartbeat. You say words with your chest and know there is power in your voice. You say words with your chest and trust yourself. You speak and realize that in slowing down to speak you can breathe. It's a strange turn of phrase, you think. Being allowed to breathe. Having to seek permission for something so natural. The basis of life. In turn, having to seek permission to live. It's summer now, so let's slow down and breathe. Let's say you're playing basketball on Saturday afternoon in July and you're sprawled out on the sideline, taking a breather. You reach into your bag and pull out the bulk of your 35mm film camera, always heavy in the hand. You start to take photos, and later, when you've dipped the negatives in chemicals, you see you took one by accident. Your finger depressed the shutter a split second after taking one before. It was sunny, so maybe 1/250th of a second after. And later, once you've developed the film, this is what came out. The ball has left the shooter's hand. It's spinning backwards as it moves through the air. All 4 players of this game of 2-on-2 cease motion to watch a ball rotate through the air a rate quicker than the eye can acknowledge. The shooter wheels the ball towards the hoop. The others have their own intentions, but the shooter, you know, he wants the ball to go in. The sky is blue and there's a dusting of cloud. It's 26 degrees on a Saturday afternoon in July. If the ball goes in, they will pick it up and start a new round from the top. If it does not, one or more of the players will rush towards the ball, and they will continue to play. They do this because they need to. They want to. They do this because they can feel it. There's so much more you wish to say, but there aren't the words. It's summer now, and language is flimsy, but sometimes it's all you have. You're sitting in your garden, mouth prized open in this heat. On the small table in front of you, ice shrinks in water, and your notebook is as still as the air, humid and sticky. You're writing her letters, building her a world you can share. You're writing about seeing the hanging orb in the sky when one should not. The moon resting there, pale against the daylight, fleshy in the darkness. You're trying to write slow so she can hear what you're saying, but also because there is pleasure in this, where it's not so much a matter of the head, but of the chest. Speaking of, A Tribe Called Quest is playing. The low end theory. You are wondering what led Q-Tip, unspoken band leader, to carve away everything on the high end of sound, allowing the low end of sound, the bass, to dominate, allowing it to speak as if it was a prayer, a desire for freedom. This isn't an angry album. Sure, there are a plethora of characters who make an appearance, but they are there for purposes of visibility. The album is about being seen, about being heard. It is about freedom, even if it is brief, even if it's only to be found in a head nod and Fife's verse for Butter, even if it's only to be found in the joyful surprise for Busta Rhymes' scene-stealing verse and scenario. Hanif Abdurraqib wrote about this album, wondering how strange a life, to be presented to the world through your flaws, through blood, swollen face, your bent body. How strange a life you and other black people lead, forever seen and unseen, forever heard in silence. And how strange it is to have to carve out small freedoms, to have to tell yourself that you can breathe. But how beautiful it is when those freedoms arrive, when you're breathing, when you're matching Fife word for word, or singing the refrain, "We got the jazz, we got the jazz." How beautiful when you're in a crowd and you find your wandering gaze met by another 20, 30 meters away, both of you unaware that your shoulders and hips are moving to the baseline, because this is not something you've had to think about for once. This is something you just do. And understanding this, and the circumstances which brought you to this moment, you both raise a small hand of acknowledgement. How wonderful are moments like these, where you don't have to hide. How wonderful to realise, amidst thrum of a bass drum, that sometimes it's a joy to be alive.
So Caleb, it's a bit of an easy gig, this writing thing, isn't it? You know, you write a book, you get reprinted 4 or 5 times, you have 3 pages in the New Yorker, New York Times. I'm sure it's not like that really, but I'd be interested to know a bit about your route to publication, how your travel.
Yeah. It has felt like a real journey, I think. I wrote Open Water in the summer of 2019. So between May and September, after I connected with my now literary agent in May, and I actually came to her with some non-fiction. I didn't have a novel, I didn't have any fiction to hand, but she said I had the voice for a novel and suggested that I go away and write a novel. So I was looking at her like, okay, cool. But the plan was that I would write across the summer, and then whatever I had in September we would submit to publishers. Halfway through that process, so like late June, early July, I had what I thought was a really solid first draft. And I went away on holiday. It was like kind of like sat on the beach somewhere and just feel like, oh, this is great, I'm going to come back to some notes and we'll tinker a little bit and then we'll send it out. And I came back and she was like, you need to start again. This is not, you need to, the voice is there, but there's nothing here to give. Which was really bruising at the time, but was definitely the best thing to do. Around that time I left my job and just was like writing, like concentrating on writing full time. And in what felt like a real fever dream, I wrote most of this between July and August of 2019. Like 90% of what it is today was written in that period of time. And then we submitted to publishers on the 3rd of September. And within a few days we had some interest, and then a lot more interest. And it eventually went to auction, which was a very surreal process. And very, just, I guess, not really having known anything about the publishing industry, I didn't know that this wasn't normal. I assumed, I was like, yeah, everyone's going to auction, it's fine. But I'm really grateful that so much of what I put into the book was being felt by editors and now by readers as well.
Well, what was the impetus to write though? I mean, you were working as a photographer, presumably.
Yeah, I was doing like a lot of freelance work as a photographer, but I've always thought of myself as a writer.
Okay.
First, like I think I've been writing since I was like, I don't know, Mum said she'd probably say, like really young. And I've always wanted to tell stories through whatever medium that comes, but I think something about literature has always really attracted me. Something about language, and I guess the limits of language. I guess that has always felt like a bit of a challenge to me, like how so much of Open Water felt like I was trying to stretch language to its limits and employing different art forms to do that.
Sure,
yeah.
Sure. And also, one of the kind of lodestones of the book is another book, which is Zadie Smith's NW, which the main character goes to a reading that she does and gets the book signed. And if anybody knows the Zadie Smith book, that's all about very much embedded in North London. And I think it actually says in here, I might be wrong, it might be in one of your interviews where you sort of say that you wanted to do a similar thing but for South London.
Yeah, I think, I was saying earlier when I read NW when I was 18 or so, and it was the first time that I'd read like a very specific corner of London that had been like, painted in that way with all its beauty and all of its flaws. And in a way, like when I was writing this, I was like, this is something I've always wanted to write about, this community in South East London. South East London is the best part of London by far.
We love you.
But particularly the parts of South East London that you were writing about in here in Bellingham and Catford, which is, I'm assuming, where you kind of grew up. Yeah. Did that seem? Obviously, it was a kind of powerful motivation for the book, but did it seem strange at the same time to be writing about
home?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes and no, because I think that I was talking to someone about this the other day about this idea of like my fascination with South East London specifically, and how it's really about the community and the texture of the people that exist here, and how so many people here are people of the diaspora who have come from elsewhere to make a home here, and that to me is really fascinating, and how they've like embedded themselves within like UK culture and found their own sort of like spaces as well. So I think I'll be writing about South East London for the foreseeable, to be honest.
And in the book, the main character gets his copy of NW signed by Zadie Smith, which you've also did. So I mean that just leads me to, in a naff way, ask you kind of how much is autobiographical or how much is not autobiographical.
That was definitely before I was saying it was one of the like few sort of autobiographical things, but I think with this book, like I wanted to write something that felt very personal without necessarily being autobiographical. So I wanted to say this is a feeling that I know. This is like I know what it means to love. I know what it means to lose. I know what it means to grieve. And in constructing fictional events around that, so it's like always starting from emotion and wondering how I can bridge the gap between expression, and saying like if I start at the feeling then I try to express that, then I'm going to get as close as possible.
Were there any other writers that kind of influenced you in the writing of it? I mean, because it's quite unusually, I think, for a novel written today, the tense it's written in, the fact that the main characters that are never named, and it reminded me of a kind of European fiction in a way. I don't know.
I think I, like, first and foremost was really heavily influenced by poets.
Right.
I spent a lot of this process reading poetry and reading work that kind of veered across fiction, lyric, essay. When Sarah and my agent first suggested that I write a novel, the first question I asked myself was, what can a novel be? And I was really interested in seeing how far I could push the form of a novel without losing the narrative structure, without losing its spine. And so using the second person really helped push both myself and also readers as far as possible into the narrative to create something that was really intimate, and really heighten that feeling of love that's being described in its various forms. Because while it's a story that's about love, it's also sort of a love letter to everything that I love as well.
It very much is a love story, yes, but it's also, as you say, a love letter to the things that you love, particularly as is evident in the passage that you read in music. I think I've read a quote where you said you were always writing towards music.
Yeah, for sure. There's an African American artist, Arthur Jafer, who talks about black music being one of the only spaces that black people don't have to feel marginal. And I remember hearing him speak a few years ago at Serpentine Gallery and hearing him saying that, and it really beginning to influence my work in a very big way. And knowing that I wasn't a musician, wondering how close I could get to music, or at least to rhythm, and to sort of the inherent rhythms that I think everyone has. I think that you could really recognise someone's rhythm, it's very obvious.
I think that's very true. I mean, because there's actually a kind of, there's a long history of if you like, white people curating black music and, well, copying it as well, but also fanatics kind of keeping the flames alive of a lot of black music. But I don't think that's the same can be said about the other art that's in your book, which is probably a lot less well known by a kind of wider public than I mean, you've got some lovely images of both photography and paintings in the book as well.
Yeah, I think especially there's one painter who's referenced, Lynette Yudin-Boache, who had a show on at the Tate recently, and is an enormous influence of mine. She's also British Ghanaian, and also really talks about Ghana as this place that isn't necessarily home, but is a way of her thinking and feeling and seeing the world. And so I kind of wanted to ask myself, how do I think and how do I feel and how do I see the world? And while this is a portrait of two people in their early 20s who are falling in love, it's very much also a self-portrait of myself at that specific moment.
There's some lovely descriptions of basement bars and and then travelling home as we all have to, or train around, sharing,
especially if you live in the southeast.
Yeah, exactly. Sharing music and I should also say that the short story that Caleb wrote, Pray, is a fabulous piece of work, but I think the only way you can access it at the moment is on Radio 4 website, where it's read by Ben Bailey Smith, who's Sadie Smith's brother, which was a nice bit of
full circle moment.
Yeah. But I recommend it because it's a terrific story. What are you working on at the minute?
So working on another novel. I say working in like the loosest possible terms. there's a deadline, but
2 months, mate.
Like just thinking and feeling, and sitting in my studio and staring out the window and hoping something materialises. But also working on some stuff for the screen as well. So working on a TV show set in South East London, and a feature film about a group of young men who take a road trip just because they can.
Okay. Yeah. But no photography at the minute.
Slowly but surely. I think my like big photography project is a collection of portraits of black people just in their everyday moments that I've been working on without really knowing I've been working on it for the past 5 years or so. And I think soon will come the time for me to really sit down with all of the negatives and collate and think about how I want to display them. But I think it doesn't feel like there's a rush for that project. And I think also a really important part of the work is not just me making the images, but also giving people opposite the lens the space to be their most honest selves. And so for me, that's enough for that.
I'm taking a question from the audience now, if anybody has one for Kate.
I've got one. I think I've got loads, but I'll ask a simple one. What kind of writing were you doing that wasn't literary before your agent said, "Hey, like write me a novel instead"?
So I emailed her a collection of non-fiction essays. There were about 20 of them that I'd been steadily writing since 2017. And they were about all of the things that made its way into Open Water. So they were about photography and music and art, but also about the way that we see each other, and care and love and blackness. And I think at the core of them was this idea of expressions of love and what happens when we're not able to, when we fail to express the love that we have for other people or for other things, and why that failure might occur. And that was was a big sort of basis for writing this book, this like failure in language, or sometimes not language, but just failure in expression.
So are they likely to see the light of day?
Every so often I open them up and I wonder whether these are things that I want to be in the world. But in a way it was almost like another draft. It felt like the first draft of Open Water, even though it wasn't fiction, and even though it didn't contain any of these characters. It was a way for me to sort through different ideas that I'd been having for a long time, but hadn't been able to put language to. So maybe.
Or maybe you'll also write some new ones.
Perhaps.
When you get time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Well,
round of applause.
They can find you a book for your girlfriend, your husband, your girl or your boy. And if you've got a need for an uplifting read, Justine and Jonathan can pick out a book you'll enjoy. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. Crystal Palace Hill, that is. But you can order online.